Before we start our G100 coverage, I just wanted to make a statement about the breaking news that Olympus was selling off what remains of their camera division to a company called JIP, where the future of it remains uncertain. A lot of people are bringing up my name in the context of this because I predicted the death of Micro Four Thirds and Olympus cameras specifically a couple of years ago, and they seem to think that I'm going to be happy about this or gloating, and that's not the case at all. If a weatherman predicts a hurricane and then the hurricane goes on to destroy homes, they're not happy because of the destruction. Perhaps they take a little bit of comfort in knowing that they helped people anticipate that so that they could plan for it. And that was always our goal. We're on the side of the consumers, not the corporations. And we want to give you all the information we can to help you make educated buying choices. And that's what I'm about to do for the Panasonic G100. I hope you find it helpful. Be sure to subscribe to see the full video where we're going to talk about the shutdown of the Olympus camera company, or whatever the new form it takes will be, because we're doing a great deal of research and reaching out to contacts so we can provide as much information as possible. Thanks and bye.
Today, Panasonic launched the Lumix G100, the most powerful Micro Four Thirds camera for vlogging yet. We're going to tell you exactly what it is and what it does, and how it compares against the famous Canon M50 and the new Sony ZV-1 vlogging cameras to help you best spend your money. I'm going to cut out all the marketing BS. We have tested more than 100 different cameras, and as YouTubers, we've made more than 1,300 videos. So we have a lot of experience with what works and what doesn't work. So until you can get your hands on it, this should provide you a good guide for whether or not you should pre-order it and take advantage of those pre-order benefits like a $50 discount, an extra battery, and a battery charger. Right now, it'll be $700, but after August 1st, I think it'll go up to $750 for the camera and the lens, which is a pretty good price. This is a 4K 30 frames per second vlogging camera. It uses the interchangeable lens Micro Four Thirds system, which has a massive variety of lenses, though, as we'll look at in a little bit, the lenses that you might use for vlogging are actually a little bit limited. It uses computational audio. It's the first camera of its type to do this that I know of. And based on what I saw in the presentation given to me by the Panasonic people, it sounded better than any other on-camera microphone we've ever tested. And what that might mean is you might not have to put a shotgun mic on your camera for a lot of different use cases. It also has advanced face autofocus and auto exposure, better than any other Micro Four Thirds camera. This has been a pain point with Panasonic in the past, and it is the single reason we switched away from our entire suite of more than like 8 or 9 Micro Four Thirds Panasonic cameras over to Canon many years ago. So maybe it'll be time to switch back. If you do want to pre-order it, go to sdp.io/G100. Let's talk about the audio capabilities, because sound is so important on YouTube. It has 3 integrated microphones, and what it does is it finds your face in the frame and changes the directionality of those microphones to pick up audio, especially from where you are. So if you move side to side in the frame, it'll follow you with the microphone, helping to remove background distractions. It also has this Ozo audio processing that will remove noise, much like your Zoom meetings do, much like your smartphone does. And we found that to be pretty amazing at reducing that background hum that basically every metropolitan area seems to have. It does have a mic jack, and unfortunately it is on the screen side of the camera, but it seems to be high enough up that it won't block the screen, and it does not have a headphone jack, so if you do want to review your footage, you'll have to play it through the kind of tinny speaker. And no, there's no option for Bluetooth microphones or headphones. The autofocus capabilities are really standout. It, however, does not have phase detect autofocus. It still uses Panasonic's contrast autofocus system. While that might be a limitation, Panasonic does have a pretty good autofocus system for contrast, what they call the depth from defocus or DFD autofocus system. It hasn't been perfect in the past, but based on the examples that we saw, it tracks better than other Panasonic cameras. It was actually a relief to hear Panasonic say, hey, our other cameras tended to wander to the background or hunt in and out, and the background bokeh would kind of move in and out, kind of pulse throughout the video whenever using continuous autofocus. That's the reason we switched away. That's the reason we haven't picked up the Panasonic S1H, and the reason we're still using Canon for our studios here. So to hear them acknowledge it and say that they fixed it, that's really promising and something we want to test out more. Subscribe to see our full review. One feature that it lacks that the Sony ZV-1 has is the ability to focus on a product when you hold it in front of the camera. This is a really common use case for things like unboxing videos, product reviews, makeup tutorials. Only the Sony ZV-1 has a feature specific for that, but in the ZV-1 we actually loved it, and that one feature made it our recommendation for any of those types of vloggers. We have an entire video released just a few days ago comparing all the other recent vlogging cameras, so check that out if you're in the market for this. It has a flippy screen, and it's in the right place. It flips to the side where it's not going to be blocked by a microphone or a tripod. It is a higher resolution screen than other cameras of this class. They're calling it a 1.8 million dot screen, but keep in mind each red, green, and blue component of a single pixel is considered a dot. So this works out to be still a fairly low resolution. Maybe it's like 1000 by 600, somewhere in that ballpark. And it's brighter than the other cameras. They said it's 1.4 times brighter than a G90. That's a real problem with all these vlogging cameras, is sometimes you shoot out in the sun and it catches a little bit of glare and you cannot see anything on the screen. That little bit extra brightness should help with that. Panasonic has a very good touch user interface, so you actually can change settings and make adjustments from the front of the camera. That's far superior to the terrible Sony touch user interface, but pretty much on par with what we get from our Canon cameras. The levels are nice and big and visible, so when you're talking you can make sure that the sound is adequate and yet not peaking. That's the kind of thing you have to monitor. And when you're recording, it outlines the entire frame with red. This is great because I have definitely shot an entire video only to realize that I wasn't recording or the recording shut off. The Sony ZV-1 handles this by putting a dedicated red light on the front of the camera. They are excited because this now records vertical video. And really with any camera, you can just turn the camera vertically and record with it. But what the G100 does that's unique is it detects that you turn the camera vertically and embeds that in the video's metadata. So when you drag it into your video editing app, it will show up as vertical. It's not a big deal to rotate it, but it's a nice to have. If you're shooting for, say, Instagram stories or TikTok, that can be a little bit helpful. It will also allow you to mask off an aspect ratio in case you want to record a square video. You can do that with any camera, but you have to kind of imagine where the edges are, and that can make it difficult to compose your picture well. So I really appreciate that extra thoughtfulness. It records vertical video, but it does not have a tripod mount on the side of the camera. So if you're going to turn the camera vertically, you will have to purchase an L bracket. They have a very cool tripod that connects via USB cable, but that will not allow you to record vertical video, so you're still going to have to buy an extra gadget if you want to get that done. Here's where the marketing BS part comes in. Panasonic wants you to believe that you can record videos with this camera and seamlessly, wirelessly transfer it to your phone for quick editing and publication. This is important because most new creators now are doing everything with their smartphone. And why not? The camera on the smartphone is great, and you can edit it and publish it all in one seamless motion without ever having to worry about transferring files. So when you pick up a real camera, you immediately take a huge setback to your workflow because you have to transfer the files. Lumix provides a wireless app that transfers it via Wi-Fi, but the camera itself only has a very, very outdated 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi radio. When I asked the people at Panasonic how long it took to transfer a 5-minute HD video, they said it would take about 10 minutes. So if you can imagine, if you're a vlogger and you record a 5-minute video and you want to post it, are you willing to sit there and wait with your phone open to only the Lumix app and with the camera running from its battery while it transfers over the course of 10 minutes? The answer is no. Nobody is ever going to do that. It is useless. So I would totally disregard the smartphone workflow. And while I'm at it, I'll say that it lacks other features of the smartphone. For example, you could not use it to live stream your Instagram stories. They also warned me that transferring to an iPhone only supports HD video. You cannot at the moment transfer 4K video to the iPhone. So how do you get your video files from your camera to your smartphone or computer for editing and publication? You would have to use a separate SD card reader. This is not the end of the world, but it is an extra step of inconvenience, and having recorded 1,300 videos myself, when I need to go back and just pick up a quick little bit of B-roll, I use my smartphone and then I airdrop it to my computer. And the reason is it actually does waste a few minutes taking that card out, putting it in the reader, browsing through the files, copying them over. Wireless transfer capabilities are something all camera manufacturers need to work on. This is not a disadvantage of this specific camera. There is literally no real camera that has decent wireless file transfer capabilities, and that is ridiculous. People will want to use this as a webcam because many people are streaming from their computers because they're teaching yoga from home, or they're teaching their science class around the world from home and they want better video quality. This camera will not do this at this moment. Panasonic does have a webcam app that supports some of their cameras, but apparently it does not support this camera. That's too bad, but it does have a clean HDMI out. So what you could do is get an HDMI to USB adapter and read in that HDMI. It's not the end of the world. It's like an extra $50. They're fairly cheap. There are some time limits. When you're shooting at 4K, it will record for 10 minutes and then stop. If you're shooting at 1080 at 60 frames per second, like we are now, you can record up to 20 minutes before it stops. At 1080 and 30 frames per second, it will stop automatically at 30 minutes. This might seem like a lot, but a lot of people want to use these cameras to give long lectures and not have to worry about it. You might want to use this camera to record your kid's concert. Probably not a great option, because if it does shut off, you're going to be really mad that you missed the end of your video. I mentioned it has a micro USB 2 port, and that's a big disappointment. Other cameras have USB-C, and that allows for faster charging and faster file transfers. Micro USB 2 is a really, really old standard. Because Panasonic is not shipping a battery charger for people not pre-ordering, charging via USB is going to be the main way to do it. And if you've upgraded all your other devices, it means you'll have to carry this one kind of old and obscure cable just to charge this particular camera. Kind of a pain, but not the end of the world. You can charge it, but you cannot charge and record at the same time. Let's compare it to the Sony ZV-1, which we recently reviewed, a very good vlogging camera that still has some really strong weaknesses. They're at about the same price point. Panasonic's marketing team really pushed the idea that the G100 had a bigger sensor than the Sony ZV-1. That would make you think that you would get shallower depth of field and better low light image quality. However, using the power of crop factor and a little bit of mathematics, we can determine exactly how it would compare. If you put this into full frame equivalence, the G100's lens is equivalent to a 24 to 64 millimeter f7 to f11 lens. The ZV-1, on the other hand, is equivalent to a 26 to 70 millimeter f4.6 to f7.1. So the ZV-1 isn't quite as wide, but it is about a full stop faster, which means you could expect about half as much noise when recording in low light and about twice as much background blur. So oddly, the smaller sensor here overpowers the bigger micro four thirds sensor. However, the G100 is an interchangeable lens system, so you can put on different micro four thirds lenses and get more background blur. For example, you could use the Lumix 12mm f1.4, which is a full frame equivalent to 24mm f2.8. And there you would get a nice amount of background blur that would easily outperform the ZV-1. You should know, though, that that particular lens is $1,200, so now your $750 camera is suddenly much more expensive, but also more capable. The ability to change lenses out is a real advantage of the interchangeable lens system. The Lumix G100 is very light at 412 grams, but it's substantially heavier than the Sony ZV-1 at 294 grams. That's not a huge deal when it's in your backpack, but when you're walking around for an extended period of time holding it at arm's length, that extra weight, you're going to feel it at some point. Both the ZV-1 and the G100 have a compact, holdable tripod mount meant for handheld vlogging or for setting it up on a table. The ZV-1 is Bluetooth based, whereas the Panasonic version of it requires a USB cable. In a way, that's an advantage for the Panasonic because it does not require a separate battery. However, every cable is an opportunity for that cable to be caught on something and knock your whole camera over. Again, I've recorded 1,300 videos and I've probably had 3 or 4 camera drops caused by cables getting caught on something. It's inevitable. It will happen to you at some point if you create enough content. The G100 does support external shotgun mics, though they seem to indicate that you won't need one because the microphone built into it is so powerful. I don't believe that, especially if you're working farther away from the camera. Something like a lavalier mic or a shotgun mic is going to outperform it. And in those cases, you will require a separate cable running to the mic jack. The Sony ZV-1 has that built into the hot shoe, so you do not require any extra cables, and they have a wide variety of mics, including shotgun mics and wireless lavalier mics, so that's a win for the Sony. I don't know which of these two cameras is going to outperform for autofocus. The Sony does have phase detect autofocus. Subscribe to see our test of the G100 to see which really autofocuses better. The G100 does require you to hide your face anytime you're holding a product up to the camera, or else it will continue to lock onto your face. This is a frustration point with us with the Canon cameras too, and it looks really awkward on camera if you're holding something up and you have to hide your face all the time. So that's a big win for the Sony there. An advantage for the Lumix is that it has built-in time lapses. It will record a time-lapse video without any additional processing. In the Sony, you would have to take a series of still images and then import it on your computer and process it. Basically, the Sony does not support time lapses. The G100 has an electronic viewfinder, so you can hold the camera up to your eye. If you're filming somebody else in bright sunlight, that's a real big advantage. It's also incredibly useful if you're reviewing your own footage in sunlight because you can see it so much better than using the LCD. The G100 also has a sharper LCD with about twice the resolution of the ZV-1, and it has a vastly better touch user interface. I am able to navigate the ZV-1 by reaching my hand around and pushing the buttons and dials, but it's a slow and kind of painful process. The G100 will make that much easier. The ZV-1 does operate as a webcam, whereas the G100 does not. Now let's compare the G100 to the Canon M50 vlogging camera. The M50 vlogging camera really won our recent test. I was blown away by the performance of a $500 kit, and it's still what I recommend to most people getting started at vlogging. The lens actually is faster when you put it into equivalent terms than the G100. The Canon M50 essentially has a 24-72 f5.6 to f10 lens, whereas the G100 is very close, but it's f7 to f11. So it gathers about half a stop less light, so you'll see a little bit less background blur, a little bit more noise in low light conditions. Let's take a minute and talk about electronic stabilization in these cameras. All the cameras we're discussing have electronic stabilization, which uses software at the time of recording to stabilize your walking footage. This really makes a big difference and makes everything less nauseating for the people watching your videos. However, this requires the camera to crop down a little bit so that it has room to move the image around the sensor. And the Sony ZV-1, we found it to essentially become unusable because it cropped it so much that when you were holding it at arm's length, it was now too tight. So you had to really stretch to get a usable video clip out of it. The G100 is going to have a similar problem with the kit lens because it will crop substantially. Now, the M50 would have that problem too, except for the M50, you can buy a super wide-angle stabilized lens that's equivalent in 35mm terms to an 18-35 f6.4 to f9. Lumix does have super wide lenses that you could use, but they are not stabilized. There is no stabilized super wide-angle lens produced by Lumix, and thus, if you wanted to go super wide and keep that camera a little bit closer to you, hold it a little bit more comfortably, you would have to choose an unstabilized lens, and then you wouldn't get as stable of a result. This will require testing to see just how good it actually looks. You can, however, attach the $1,200 24mm f2.8 equivalent, it's a 12mm f1.4, to get that extra bokeh more than you could out of the M50. The Canon M system does not have a fast 24mm equivalent prime lens, but you can put on a speed booster or an adapter and use Canon DSLR lenses for excellent results. So there's a little bit of extra bulk and a little bit of extra cost, but there is a wide variety of less expensive Canon lenses, so you could get similar background blur for substantially less money if you're willing to use an adapter. The M50 is actually a little bit lighter than the G100. The G100, however, supports 4K at 30 frames per second using the full width of the frame. The M50 essentially isn't a 4K camera. Now, technically, the specs show that it's 4K, but it has a very heavy crop that we consider to be essentially unusable, and you lose the awesome phase detect autofocus. So it might be okay for catching little bits of B-roll, but you wouldn't want to use it in the context of vlogging. We'll have to test the two cameras together to see which outperforms for autofocus, since the G100 has a new autofocus system. The M50 has the advantage of being able to be used as a USB webcam, and the handheld tripod that you can get for the M50 is wireless, so you don't have to run a cable to it. But the G100 has a vastly sharper LCD that should overall help you assess whether things are actually in focus. So, should you buy the G100 for $750 or $700 if you're pre-ordering it? If you're an existing Micro Four Thirds user and you're doing vlogging, meaning you have a bunch of Micro Four Thirds lenses and accessories, then yes, I would feel comfortable saying pre-order it. I expect it to outperform all the other Micro Four Thirds cameras because the people at Panasonic were very clear. They showed a side-by-side test against other Micro Four Thirds cameras, and this one had better vlogging autofocus performance. It just locked onto faces and didn't hunt and didn't wander around the background. But for everybody else, if this is going to be your first Micro Four Thirds camera, definitely wait for us to do our full review. Well, we'll compare it against the ZV-1, the M50, and any other cameras that might arise between now and then. If you are going to pre-order it, use our link at sdp.io/G100 and get those extra gadgets. I made a video in 2018 titled Micro Four Thirds is Dead, and Micro Four Thirds is the lens system that this camera uses. So people are definitely going to bring that up. And first of all, I totally predicted that Panasonic and Olympus would continue making Micro Four Thirds cameras. I still expect to see a Panasonic GH6 released pretty soon. This doesn't mean that there is long-term viability for the Micro Four Thirds platform. I still expect the support for new lenses to kind of dwindle. But that doesn't have a big impact for vlogging case scenarios because most vloggers will use one or maybe two lenses, and you don't need that sort of upgradability. Now, the ZV-1 doesn't even have an interchangeable lens, so it's not part of any system. So it's definitely not a disadvantage over the ZV-1. The M50, well, it's part of the Canon M system, and Canon is continuing to support that, but I also see support dwindling. There are not nearly as many lenses for the M system, and frankly, I don't know that the M system is viable in the long term now that Canon has put all their energy into the full-frame R mount. I would like everybody to subscribe because we have a lot more vlogging content and tutorials coming up, as well as a review of this camera. And we're going to be reviewing a new set of wireless compact lab mics that I think are just perfect for getting awesome sound when you're vlogging. In the comments down below, I'd like to tell you, is this what you hoped to see out of a new vlogging camera? What are your disappointments? And which of these technologies do you think are going to trickle up into the GH6, which is the Micro Four Thirds camera I'm absolutely most excited about? Thanks, I'm Tony Northrup, bye.